Hello everybody, this is Max121 and welcome to my first episode of my review show about Animaniacs. Every day in August Maniacs. In this first installment, we are going to be looking at the Animaniacs first week on Fox Kids. Before we begin, let's go over a brief history of Animaniacs. Tiny Toon Adventures was first broadcast in 1990 on syndication before moving to Fox Kids a year later in 1991. Tiny Toon Adventures was a series by Steven Spielberg and Tom Ruegger, loosely based on the classic Looney Tunes shorts. It featured cameos from some of the classic stars like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and Pepe Le Pew, among their younger counterparts, including Buster and Babs Bunny, Plucky Duck, Hampton J. Pig, and Fifi LaFume. The show was a smash success, and after 99 episodes, the show was canceled for a multitude of reasons, including the fact that there was just not enough ideas to really continue justifying the series going on. They wanted something new. The creators needed an idea, and Plucky Duck was the breakout character. With the Plucky Duck show, the Plucky Duck, the antagonist, got his own show, although only one episode was produced for the show. It was later adapted to Tiny Toons itself. And Plucky Duck show afterwards would just be reruns of Plucky Duck segments of Tiny Toons Adventures. Tiny Toons would later have try to get a real Plucky Duck spin-off with the name Animaniacs, starring Plucky Duck and a few other ducks. However, there was criticism of Warner Bros. The duck characters as main characters were just too cliche. There was already a show about ducks, Disney's DuckTales, and there were also other cartoons about ducks, like Darkwing Duck or some other cartoon, you name it. The duck show just wasn't gonna work, so they had to replace the ducks with new characters. But what character? Well, every character has basically been taken. Garfield's a cat, Snoopy's a dog. There are way too many bears. Yogi Bear, the Berenstain Bears, Winnie the Pooh. There are also way too many mice, but it's not like Animaniacs will care, as we all know, Pinky the Brain. But the thing is that the best idea was to have characters that represented nothing. Ink blots. These characters would be based on a redesign of Bosco the Talking Kid from Tiny Toons, who was redesigned because his original design resembled blackface. And so the redesign gave him dog ears and a dog tail. So Bosco would lead the way for designs for Yakko, Wacko, and Dot. And with all that under the way, the series was ready for development. Animaniacs would use a lot of the same crew that Tiny Toons Adventures briefly used, like Tom Ruegger, Sherry Stoner, and many more. Tress MacNeille, voice of Babs, would return to voice Dot Water, but notably, Charlie Adler, voice of Buster Bunny, would not be cast back, which made Charlie Adler extremely angry, which led to the final few episodes of Tiny Toons having Buster replaced by John Cassier. Rob Paulsen would voice Yakko Warner. Rob Paulsen previously voiced Foulmouth, and Jess Harnell would voice Wacko. Jess Harnell was relatively new to the voice acting sphere, as his most well-known role at the time was Brer Rabbit, who he played in Who Framed Roger Rabbit and the Disneyland ride Splash Mountain. Animaniacs would have the same quality animation provided by overseas studios like Tokyo Movie Shudshot, ACOM, Wang Film, and many more. Animaniacs would be a very magazine-style series, similar to Sesame Street, where segments can be of varied lengths and varied genres. And well, that's basically a brief history recap on Animaniacs. let's get into it. The first batch of episodes will be released in the third week of September 1993, starting on September 13th. Monday, September 15th, that is, where the kids of the 90s got their first taste of what Animaniacs would be like. So let's get in for the first episode and how kids in the 90s were first introduced to Animaniacs. The first segment of Animaniacs is called Newsreel of the Stars, and it happened before we even saw the intro for the first time. Newsreel of the Stars is a parody of old newsreels, in this case, telling the in-universe backstory of the Animaniacs, about how they got captured and how the cartoons made absolutely no sense. The Newsreel of the Stars was a great introduction to the Animaniacs, and it told people the basic premise of the show. Although the entire thing would be retconned a few times, as we'll see in a bunch of future videos. But for now, Newsreel of the Stars was basically just an overview of what the Animaniacs were. They were old cartoon stars that are locked away because they made absolutely zero sense, and all of a sudden, after all these years, would finally be walked out of the Warner Bros. Vault as they would escape the water tower. Now we get to the part where we talk about the intro. The intro was of course iconic, with lines and rhymes, because, well, if you've ever watched the show, then chances are this is one of many songs that'll get stuck in your head. This intro, of course, sings about how the waters escape and wreak havoc on the Warner movie lot for fun, along with mentioning the side cast and, of course, Bill Clinton. In every episode, the end of the intro would change every time. And in the case of the first episode, it's simply, here's the show's namey. At last, we get to the meat of the video, and that is, of course, reviewing episodes. We start off with Desanitized, which is another prologue for the Animaniacs, this time set in the present day rather than the 1930s in particular. This has Dr. Scratch's stiff as he reminisces about how he was the most respected psychiatrist in Hollywood until the Animaniacs came. The Animaniacs, of course, had just escaped from the water tower, and now they were out to wreak havoc on the Warner Bros. Lot. This episode, of course, is the main debut segment of the Warner Bros. And the Warner sister. And this segment has a lot of great gags, and overall is a fantastic introduction, besides, of course, Newsreel of the Stars. It really supplements Newsreel of the Stars very well, and honestly, I'd have to say that this is still a very hilarious segment. Seeing their first reaction to Hello Nurse, the song about stock markets and told in rap form, the first visit from the CEO, who would later be known as Thaddeus Plots, and there's just so much to love about this one, and it's a great start to a great show. Next up is a segment called The Monkey Song, a parody of Harry Bonfeldt's The Monkey, which was an old song from the 1960s. This song version in this case features, of course, the Animaniacs characters. It is the first time, besides the intro, we've seen some of the side characters. Overall, this is a pretty memorable outing for the Animaniacs, and of course, marks a great first song segment, if you don't count the intro, that is. 99 Tude is the final segment of the first episode of Animaniacs. This episode is a parody of the classic children's book Goodnight Moon, and is narrated by Jim Cummings, using a voice very similar to his Winnie the Pooh voice. This episode is pretty notable for being the first appearance of several other side characters that weren't in the Monkey Song, along with the fact that the animation here is much more subpar, and that's because it's animated by a studio named Freelance Animators in New Zealand, which are generally considered inferior to more usual studios like TMS, Wang, or ACOM, to name a few. The animation is definitely very off in this one, but it still looks pretty good. I mean, it's still better than a whole lot of Saturday morning cartoons of that time. Like, I mean, it still beats the most of the stuff that Deke was putting out at the time. And honestly, besides these off-putting animation, it's pretty good. Now we move on to episode 2, the first debut of Pinky and the Brain, which is mentioned right in the show's intro, as this gag for that episode is Pinky and the Brady. But the first segment is definitely probably the most iconic segment of the entire show, Yakko's World. This is a song about Yakko naming off all the nations of the world. Despite its inaccuracies and eventually becoming obsolete as some territories change names or new territories become independent, this song is still as catchy as ever. And really, it's definitely one of the show's highlights. I like it. Next up is Cookies for Einstein, the first episode to use the entire Animaniacs meets historical figures formula. This one is for Einstein. Cookies for Einstein is an episode that has the Animaniacs teaching Albert Einstein about EMC2. But it gets one detail wrong. EMC2 is the mass energy conversion formula, not the formula for relativity. This is referenced in a later episode, but that's for another edition of Animaniaugust. All I can say is that Cookies for Einstein is a pretty good episode and very enjoyable. I definitely say that it is definitely very good. Win Big. Win Big is the first ever Pinky the Brain short on Animaniacs. And this short's plot is that Pinky the Brain are competing on a show parody of Jeopardy. And, well, this is the first ever time that, of course, Pinky the Brain appear. But this segment is also notable for, of course, the fact that Brain wears a big robotic suit, which would later be recycled for the Animaniacs video game. Win Big, honestly, it's a solid start. Well, before the episode ends, we get to our first wheel of morality, and in this case, it's moral number 2. If at first you don't succeed, blame it on your parents, they say. Now we get on to episode 3, and the opening gag for this one is Come Back Shiny. This also marks the first episode to have a start-up gag. In this case, the Warners right off the water tower off a wooden plank. Of course, we get to HMS Yakko. This episode is a loose parody of HMS Pinafore, featuring the Warner Brothers and the Warner sister. The episode, of course, also homages classic Looney Tunes cartoons, like the ones featuring Yosemite Sam as a pirate, in a kind of a way. This episode, overall, is pretty funny, but honestly, in terms of Animaniacs, it's not exactly one of the best, but it's still pretty hilarious. And now we get to our first ever segment featuring Slappy the Squirrel. Slappy Goes Wallets. Slappy Goes Wallets is the first time we ever see Slappy Squirrel and her nephew Skippy. The idea of Slappy is that she's an old retired cartoon character. In this case, basically Orwellian into the history of Looney Tunes, who is now old and bitter because she's, gone irrelevant. In this case, it's the 90s, and of course she's old. So she definitely knows all the secrets of cartoons. And this one definitely demonstrates it. Like, all the stuff she does to the dog are all classic Looney Tunes gags, but thoroughly lampshaded by Slappy. Overall, this is a great start to the Slappy saga, and I would definitely say it's worth getting a watch. We end this episode with Yakko's Universe, another segment that is a song. In this case, Yakko sings about the universe. It starts on a snowy town before Yakko eventually delves into space. It's not exactly memorable whatsoever, and it's kind of just, compared to Yakko's world, it's just not memorable, but, there's sometimes, there's just songs that don't really catch on, and in this case, this is just kind of one of them. And now we get to episode 4. This one recycles the opening gag, but the water boys coming out the tower gag is new this time, as they come out of the tower with a clown-shaped balloon. We get to another historical segment, Hooked on a Ceiling, and this one is just all-around fantastic. The jokes here are absolutely superb, from Dot thinking that Michelangelo was disappointed about her painting because he preferred the young Elvis, to Michelangelo be confused for Michelangelo of the Ninja Turtles, to the jokes about Michelangelo painting naked people over a church. Like, this is the type of stuff that, it's basically just all the best jokes that you could get on Animaniacs. Like, this is just a sample platter of just Animaniacs goodness. And the ending is just the chef's kiss of it all. Like, his imminence after Michelangelo gets terrified because the Animaniacs paint a painting of E.T. and Elliot on the wall. His imminence eventually turns out to be Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, the Emperor of Rome. Yep. And that's just a hilarious gag. This is definitely worth a watch. This is just one of the funniest segments of this whole show. And we get our first middle of the episode transition gag. In this case, they're watching a movie, and Wacko is the film projector. Technically there are ones before, like the Slappy Squirrel intro and Pinky the Brain intro, but this is the first one that is really purpose-made. And, of course, it delves into Goodfellas, the beginning. This, of course, is a parody of Goodfellas. So, how do you parody an R-rated movie about the mafia and put on a children's show? Well, the idea is simple. Turn the characters into birds. Replace all the swearing with cooing. And, of course, since they're birds, what happens is basically bloodless. They're just classic clouds of violence. And as a person who's actually seen the movie Goodfellas, before I've seen it and after I've seen it, I just have a different view on these segments. Like, before I seen it, Goodfellas, the movie, honestly found Goodfellas just be very annoying. But after I've seen it and now have the full context, it's just hilarious. Like just the idea of just all the mafia cliches being just ripped apart, and just several of the gags are just hilarious. And of course, this is the first episode of the Goodfellas saga, and it's definitely the one that most directly parodies the Goodfellas. Apparently, Steven Spielberg shows Martin Scorsese this specific segment, and Scorsese found it absolutely hilarious. I can't really blame him. It's hard not to be flattered by this. It's just a hilarious romp, and honestly, I really think you really have to watch Goodfellas to understand what makes the segment so hilarious. Honestly, it is definitely worth a watch if you've seen Goodfellas. And now, the wheel of morality returns once again. Moral number 4, never ask what hot dogs are made of. And now we get our first ever chase segment, which is something that would happen at the end of the episodes. Ralph the guard chases the waters back into the water tower as it's used into the credits, instead of the credits simply popping out of nowhere. This one involves Wacko trying to position a ladder. It's a chase segment, but it's neat that they would have this. It definitely these things definitely give Animaniacs a kind of a Jim Henson style magazine feel, where there's just these tiny things against these larger things, and I definitely do like it. Finally, we'll look at episode 5, Taming of the Screwy, the first double length episode. Before we get to that, I'd like to tell you that this episode's intro gag is the rain in Spainy. And now we get to the review of Taming of the Screwy, a parody of Taming of the Shrew. Except, no, it's not a parody of Taming of the Shrew. Only the title is. The idea is that the CEO, who has not been named Thaddeus Plots yet, but has the initials TP, decides to just, gets a call from investors in Japan who are willing to pay him an obscene amount of cash. And of course, Thaddeus Plots has to host a big party to convince him that he's worthy of the money. The thing is that of course the waters are on the loose. So how can the waters be controlled? Well, simple. Dr. Otto Scratch-Stiff. The idea is that Dr. Scratch-Stiff, is supposed. Of course, the thing is that Dr. Otto Scratch-Stiff is initially supposed to keep him in the tower, but the Waters really want to go to the party. So, as a favor, Dr. Otto Scratch-Stiff teaches them behaviors and etiquette. The Waters hilariously fail at every single one of them, including, like, when asked to say hello, Yakko says hello, nurse, instead of any sort of proper greeting. And instead of saying how do you do, Yakko says how do you do, that thing with your mouth, and then proceeds to kiss hello nurse. Of course, the thing is that, and of course, that it continues. They don't behave with simulating dinner etiquette, and Dr. Otto Scratch-Stiff decides that, enough is enough, and that they couldn't go to the party because they haven't learned anything. And then, of course, it shows that they have learned stuff, but of course, they misbehave because they love Dr. Scratch-Stiff. Which, of course, gets us to the party itself. There's a lot of celebrity cameos. Almost like a modernization of Hollywood Steps Out. We have Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. We have Madonna playing Truth or Dare with two of the Japanese execs. We have Wayne and Garth, who are, not Warner Bros., but Paramount, but, whatever. And, of course, Wacko is extremely excited about Don Knotts. Well, it's just kind of one of the funny jokes in this episode. Like, why would Wacko Warner of all people be excited about Don Knotts? Anyway, the thing is that the celebrity appearances are definitely of the 90s variety. And, yeah. That's it. And honestly, they definitely do. And of course, the Waters, of course, seem to wreak havoc, or at least, quote, wreak havoc, unquote, to the party. Dr. Otto Scratch-Stiff, and eventually the CEO himself and Ralph DeGard eventually try to return him, but it basically failed because the Japanese execs really like the Warners. Like, they found that the Warners made their party more interesting. And honestly, if you look at the character size of them, they definitely look like Japanese human versions of Yakko, Wacko, and Dot to a good degree. So, I don't know if that was intentional on the writer's part, but that is notable. It's also worth noting that the female Japanese exec is voiced by Julia Kato, who would later become well known for voicing Kira on Rugrats. Of course, and of course, speaking of celebrity famous stuff that they become more famous for other stuff, the celebrities, of course, aren't voiced by their real celebrity counterparts. Honestly, it's not too surprising. Even with Steven Spielberg's name attached to the show, there's still a budget for everything. Michelle Pfeiffer is obviously voiced by Tress MacNeille, and Wayne and Garth are obviously voiced by imitators. So, yeah. So, honestly, this segment is just hilarious. It definitely makes a good first half-hour segment. Honestly, there's just so much to like about it. And it also introduces a few of the things that we'll see later in the show. Like Wacko rim shot of the drum animation every time a cheesy joke is told. Along with the fact that I think this is the first time that Yakko says "Good night, everybody" in the when an adult joke is listed. So that's definitely historical, because that's the first time Yakko says "Good night, everybody" when an adult joke is told. In this case, it's the "Stop playing with my bust" line, referring to Wacko thinking that the head bust of Dr. Scratch Diff is a pesticide, and Scratch Diff says, "Stop playing with my bust." And of course, the "good night everybody" part refers to the fact that bust doesn't always refer to a statue of one's head, but rather can also refer to one's buttocks. So, yeah. Honestly, episode, there's a lot to like about this episode, and it definitely marks a good start to the half-hour episodes. There are definitely some flaws with this one, like really, the so like the unlike Hollywood Steps Out, the celebrity parodies really go by too quick to really fully, process them in your mind. And so really, the, so really the only celebrities you would probably remember appeared in this episode are either ones that are either ones like Michelle Pfeiffer at Catwoman that are that have prominent scenes, or ones that catch you off guard. In this case, for me, it's Wayne and Garth. Honestly, this episode is definitely recommended. It is definitely a good half hour of pure Animaniacs hilarity. I wouldn't say it's the best episode, but I really do like it for what it is. Well, that's a wrap on the first day of Animaniaugust. Make sure to stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, where we will be reviewing the second week of Animaniacs, which of course will include a lot of other classic episodes. Overall, the first week definitely cements Animaniacs already. Some of the side characters still haven't got their spotlight yet, but we'll see them in the future. And there are plenty more running segments that just haven't been introduced within the first week. So, with all that being said, goodbye, nurse.